We begin in the NFL in Minnesota as the Dallas Cowboys beat the Minnesota Vikings 40-3. And the game honestly wasn't even that close, ladies and gentlemen. For the Cowboys, Dak Prescott, he went 22 of 25. He threw for 276 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. Tony Pollard had a great performance. He had 6 receptions, 109 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns. For the Vikings, Kirk Cousins went 12 of 23. He threw for 105 passing yards. This was the largest road win in franchise history for the Cowboys. This was the second worst home loss for the Minnesota Vikings in their franchise history. So, as I began the show tonight and I discussed this matchup between the Cowboys and the Vikings, honestly, it was a beatdown that took place in Minnesota Sunday afternoon. It was a complete annihilation in Minnesota Sunday, and the Minnesota Vikings got completely outplayed in this game. In every phase of the game, the Dallas Cowboys dominated the Minnesota Vikings. It was a mismatch. And it's the second time this year where in a primetime matchup, the Minnesota Vikings have put together a very underwhelming performance. This was a pathetic performance by the Minnesota Vikings. They should be ashamed to show their faces in the city of Minnesota this week. That's how bad the Vikings were in this game. The Cowboys, they got out to a 23-3 lead at half, and I'm watching the Bengals-Steelers game, and I'm seeing the Cowboys put together drive after drive after drive against that Vikings defense that had no answers for the Cowboys offense in this game. Offensively, the Cowboys, they had a balanced attack. They had 307 passing yards, 151 rushing yards between Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott. And that Vikings defense had no answers for that Cowboys offense. The Cowboys, they converted on 12 of 17 third down plays. So the Cowboys dominated this game in every statistical category, and Dak Prescott significantly outplayed Kirk Cousins because coming into the matchup, I said that Kirk Cousins and Dak Prescott were on the same level. I think they're the same level caliber quarterback. They both have like one playoff win. They both can put up stats in regular season performances, but they always, at the most inopportune times, when you need them to perform at their best, Dak Prescott and Kirk Cousins has underperformed when the lights are at its brightest. But in this game, I believe the Cowboys, they were motivated, they were fresh off a performance against the Green Bay Packers where they gave up a 14-point lead. And remember, going into the fourth quarter against the Packers, the Cowboys were beating the Packers 28-14. And before that loss to the Packers, going into the fourth quarter with a 14-point lead or more, the Dallas Cowboys were 195-0. So I think the Cowboys were motivated all week because they heard the doubters talk about the Cowboys and not being a true contender in the NFC because they gave up a 14-point lead to the Green Bay Packers, and we've seen the Packers' struggles so far this season. So it was a bad taste in the Cowboys' mouths all week, and they showed it in this game. They showed it, and they put on a sensational performance. And honestly, I believe that with them being able to run the football and being able to stop the run, that's a recipe for success for the Dallas Cowboys. They had 151 rushing yards. but they held the Vikings to only 73 rushing yards. Now, I think Dalvin Cook is big time. I think he's very underrated as a running back, but the Dallas Cowboys front did a great job against that Vikings offense. The Cowboys defensively, they had 7 sacks against Kirk Cousins. That's something that has never happened before. That Kirk Cousins has never been sacked 7 times. They got to him 7 times in this game. So that Dallas Cowboys front featuring Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, Jonathan Haskins, Dorrance Armstrong, they got after the Vikings offensive line in this game. They really, really did. But, like, I can't say enough about the job that the Cowboys did. They had a sensational performance. You look at Micah Parsons in this game. Micah Parsons, he had 10 pressures. His pressure percentage was 37%, 2 sacks, and 1 forced fumble. So Micah Parsons was dominant in this game, and he showed why he is universally recognized as one of the best defensive players in the NFL. So Micah Parsons and that Cowboys defense did a number on Kirk Cousins and that Vikings offense. Now, when you look at the Cowboys offensively and their running backs, Tony Pollard, Ezekiel Elliott. Tony Pollard had 15 carries, 80 rushing yards. He averaged 5.3 yards per carry. Ezekiel Elliott, 15 carries, 42 rushing yards, 2.8 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns. It's clear that Tony Pollard is the number 1 running back in Dallas. It is no longer Ezekiel Elliott. Move on to the Vikings. What y'all on here talk? Okay, so I got my a lot of my family and my cousins is on my live right here right now. They comment on my live. 15, TJ on here, John Listen. These are all my cousins on here. They on here messing with me because the Packers are having a disappointing season, and the Vikings finally are about to win the NFC North. Finally. It took the Vikings long enough. It took them long enough. They finally about to win the NFC North. But I won't get off topic. Also, I want to say this about the Vikings, because you look at the Vikings so far this year. The Vikings, they have a -2 point differential this season. They're the first team to be 8-2 or better through the first 10 games and have a negative point differential. They're -2 this year. And you look at their games so far this year. Week 1, they blew out the Packers 23-7 in Minnesota. Week 2, on Monday Night Football in primetime, they got beat down by the Philadelphia Eagles 24-7. They barely beat the Detroit Lions in week 3, 28-24. Week 4, they barely beat the Saints 28-25. They beat the Bears in week 5, 29-22. Week 6, they beat the Miami Dolphins without Tua in that game. And Teddy Bridgewater was not 100%. Week 7, they had a bye week. Week 8, they beat the Arizona Cardinals, but the Arizona Cardinals are not having a good season. Week 9, they had to come from behind to beat the Commanders. They beat the Commanders 20-17. Now, I was impressed with their performance against the Bills because they were down 17 points to the Buffalo Bills, and they beat the Bills 33-30. But I've said all season long, I'm not a believer in the Minnesota Vikings. I am not a believer in Kirk Cousins. If you want to troll me because the Packers are having a bad season, that's fine. But don't come to me and pretend like the Vikings are some juggernaut. There are other teams in the NFC that I trust over the Minnesota Vikings. I trust the Tampa Bay Buccaneers over the Minnesota Vikings. I trust the Philadelphia Eagles over the Minnesota Vikings. I trust the San Francisco 49ers over the Minnesota Vikings. Stop trying to pretend like the Vikings are some juggernaut because the Packers are having a rough season. Like, people crazy, man. People like to troll the Packers and troll me because I always trash talk these opposing fan bases because they never sniffed a Super Bowl win in their franchise history. And that's the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings have never won a Super Bowl. Now, again, they have a great team. I like Justin Jefferson. I think Justin Jefferson is the best receiver in the NFL this year. I like Adam Thielen. I think Adam Thielen is the second best receiver that's a number 2 in the NFL. I like Dalvin Cook as their running back. I like the acquisition of Hawkinson at the trading deadline. But I don't believe that the Vikings are some juggernaut and they are a true contender in the NFC. I don't. I think they could be an easy first-round exit. I think they could be a first-round exit easily. But I ain't going to spend too much time on the Vikings. It was a dominating performance by the Cowboys over the Vikings. And honestly, I think it's a great thing for the Vikings because they have a quick turnaround. They have the New England Patriots coming into town on Thanksgiving. It's the nightcap. So they get a chance to have a bounce-back performance against the New England Patriots. But this was a very, very underwhelming performance for them.